Hello everyone. In this video we are going to look at the three wise men, and we are going to use clues in the Bible to decipher the story in conjunction with modern clues. We hold that the three kings originated from the three continents. Following solstice lines on or about the time of a solstice, but also about the time of essentially the Great Conjunction, or the greatest conjunction, which happens only every about 1,000 years, as is happening now. Needless to say, these three kings were probably Jewish. Jews criticizing their expulsion from Spain, the Edict of Expulsion under Ferdinand and Isabella, claimed that they had been in Spain since the time of King David, since the time of before the Phoenicians. They were the Jews of Tarshish, of essentially the West, and they claimed a great antiquity. Was there an ancient Jewish kingdom in Spain? Was there an ancient Jewish kingdom in Africa? Was there an ancient Jewish kingdom in the East? The Jews have been dispersed for as long as we are aware of their existence. What is a Jewish person? A Jewish person can be essentially loosely anyone from the East, from the Levant, if you're following the Abrahamic interpretation. It is quite interesting that of the three kings, Patissa, Caspar, Melchior, one of them, Caspar, is actually black. If they were all originating from the East, a country to the East, doesn't it seem strange that one of the three kings happens to be black? Indeed, it seems the story is useless without a map. Instead, each of the three kings probably originated from one of the three continents, bringing a treasure towards the center, meeting in the middle at the time of a great conjunction and a solstice, and following what is called a solstice line. It has been revealed to the public by one great author that tribes migrated along solstice lines for purposes and on auspicious occasions for purposes of invasion and attack. Rome was invaded by Celts following a solstice line, thereafter bringing the Roman treasure all the way back to Mediolanum. So they would take themselves there and bring back a treasure. I believe sometimes they would also take a treasure, and we've speculated the Grail quest may have been such a solstice line expedition. Why do we know they must have followed solstice lines? Elementary. The Greek script inside the New Testament does not say the three kings came from the East. It says, instead, they came from the rising of the sun. And it is apparent in ancient tradition, as pointed out by men like Norman Lockyer, that the rising of the sun is only worshipped on auspicious occasions such as the solstice. Furthermore, we know that Christmas is the solstice. The three wise men were solstice worshippers. Three continents, three races, meeting in the middle of all the countries of the world. One of them bringing something called Frank incense. We are reminded of the Franks. Is this the king from Europe? What is going on? So essentially, this is a Leline pilgrimage. During the conjunctions, they might happen every 20 years, a very auspicious occasion. It times with the lunar cycles of standstills, which is the essentially the Metonic cycle, the 19 and a bit year cycles. It is and what is the confluence traditionally? Was it always Jerusalem? Or was it once Baalbek, the temple of the world? Or was it once Giza, another temple of the world? We should ask, were Giza, and Baalbek, built to such a scale because once they were precursors of Jerusalem. So we have the three kings, presumably Jewish kings, converging at the Jerusalem temple, or possibly somewhere in Bethlehem if that lay along a Lee line or a solstice line, just as we have solstice lines in England, such as the St. Michael's line, bisecting ancient sites and going all the way to St. Michael's Mount and all the St. Michael's sites. Just incredible that we had this also in the Near East. And would the African Jewish kingdom be the kingdom of Ethiopia? There seem to be very strong links between Ethiopia and Solomon. The Ethiopians consider themselves to be descendants of Solomon, or at least their kings were descendants of Solomon, because they assumed that the Queen of Sheba had a baby with the King of Solomon. It is really quite fascinating. If you look at old accounts of travel, old travel accounts, it seems that the Jews were living literally everywhere. Every town visited by ancient travellers, by medieval travellers, contains Jews. Whether they are Arabs travelling through Russia, or ancient Greeks travelling through Russia, or the north, or Germany, or anywhere, there are Jews living there. And one must ask where they all come from. There have been so many dispersals, so many conquests of Judea that one cannot really trace this population. It is strange. And why would they not want to return to their site of origin every so often? And of course, this brings us to basically the...
Well, people, we have a major problem. What does Jewish mean? Jewish, according to this map, seems to refer to the kingdom of Judea, which contains Jerusalem, hence the word Jew. But you will see to the north is another kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. These people are not really even considered Jewish by people, for instance, searching for the biblical Christ, which is a major issue. The kingdoms which surround them are also Jewish-like kingdoms. To the north, you have the Phoenician states, and these people actually spoke an even older version of Hebrew, which is partly related to Arabic. So it would sound like Hebrew. It would sound like Jews in Israel today speaking and using some Arabic words. So, in fact, the Jewish people lived over a massive area, just a terrific area. And because of this huge area, the three wise men may have stemmed from many of their colonies. Now, it is known that Nebuchadnezzar took the Jews to Babylon. It is not really known widely why. The reason is because he thought that the Jews are actually his family, and he was bringing them back home, because after all, the Jews under Abraham had left possibly Babylon via Assyria and had finally entered Egypt as probably one of the tribes of maybe the Sea Peoples, or an earlier migration into Egypt, taking over their capital city there in Lower Egypt.
The problem of the Star of Bethlehem, because it is suggested, well, the Star of Bethlehem might be Regulus, or, well, the Star of Bethlehem might be Venus. No, it cannot. There is no way it cannot be these. It can be these things. And the reason is, you see, Jupiter and Saturn is a cycle. It is a 1,000-year cycle based on 20-year intervals, quadrants of 250 years, and it returns to its position every 800 to 1,000 years, and the world is thought to reset on this position. Furthermore, the world was thought to have begun with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and the world is considered to end at a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Hence, the Newton belief in 2060 of the world ending at a 20-year interval. Kings are timed; their births and deaths are timed according to this. When when troubles arise, it is because of a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. The Herod killing of the babies was due to a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. This is when kings rise and fall, when empires rise and fall. So it cannot be anything other than a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, though it could be associated with another star or a moon, as someone I believe suggested in my previous video in a comment, for dramatic effect. That would enhance, why not? But not only is it a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, but it's a solstice for the reasons we've explained, and the Christmas. So, Jew means of Judea, but there are other Jews. The Hebrews, for instance, come from Turkey, and they are essentially the Hittites. They resemble the Hittites greatly, if we may make that remark. Syrian Zenobia broke away an eastern fragment from Rome just before the time of Aurelian, who got it back, the golden one, the golden man, the ruler of Rome. And he took all the empires back and reformed Rome in that catastrophous 3rd century. He was Zenobia, an admirable figure on Swedish currency, was seen by some Romans and later medieval chroniclers as, quote-unquote, a Jewish queen, despite the fact she was not from Judea and was in fact a Syrian. People across that whole spectrum were seen as Jewish, which means that the historical Jesus can be someone other than someone from Judea, and biblical scholars don't recognize that at all, to their loss. So, as above, so below. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions actually form a triangle across the sky every 60 years. They appear in one place, they appear in a trigonal, one portion of a triangle away, 20 years later, one portional triangle away 20 years after that, and then back to almost their original position. That almost original position keeps shifting every 20 years until after 40 positions it returns to its original position, which is 800 to 1,000 years. So they are shifting slowly above those trigonal continents on the dinner plate Earth. And we have said that the dartboard also has been generated by the ancient belief in a base 20 system and a base 20 clockwork timing of the universe, which accords to a similar framework as the lunar timing, which is every 19 and a bit years, which is fascinating indeed. So, and that was prevalent across Western Europe in deeply ancient times. It must be said that until the pre-modern era, the Newtonian era, this entire system of Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was thought to be very auspicious. In the 1600s, it was thought the world would end when a fiery conjunction was being entered, where the 12 constellations are divided into 4 quadrants: Earth, Water, Fire, and Dry. And essentially, when it moved from the watery into the fiery trigon, it was thought the Earth would erupt into flame. That didn't happen, and it was thought, well, the system must be discredited. But we entered a monde minimum. The sun went out as it did today. Wars and witch trials.
Hey people, look at this. A stunning article. The Fiery Trigon Conjunction, an Elizabethan astrological prediction. And I want to show you a picture. It's so good. It's just so good. So basically, when the great conjunctions or the planetary lineups happened in a really long time ago, in Pisces, for instance, there would be a world flood. There would be pandemonium, death. There would be revolution, pitchforks. There would be kings and priests and all these people. There would be pandemonium. And it's as if it's shining a ray down onto a city. This is how they thought of what the great conjunctions do, or the grand conjunction, which is the planetary lineups, and what they do. And this is just incredible. Yeah.
We also see something alchemical in that we know that there are 4 elements, and with Asia, Europe, Africa, and Ocean, Earth is divided into 4. Could Asia be Earth, since it is very voluminous in size? Africa be dry, since it is dry? Europe possibly air, because the water needs to be the water, the ocean. As an appendix, this system was taught until recently. My great-grandmother told my father that the world would end in 2000, that the earth was flat, that the sun sets in the swamps, and it seems vestiges of Stone Age knowledge entered the 20th century. Why would the world end in the year 2000? Because that millennial system of recurrence was still taught until very recent times. We have the 1,000-year Reich. We have the prophet Jesus supposedly appearing, and the millennium will begin. These are millennial people, millenarial people. The world will end after 1,000 years was what was thought by Pope Sylvester. So we have the religious aspiration. All millenarialism is the basis of eschatology and end-of-year cycles. Maurice Chatelain, who wrote a brilliant book, Our Cosmic Ancestors, found that the Mayan 2012 system is actually, well, it's 2020. It actually refers to 2020 because the Mayans must have been using the base 20 Jupiter-Saturn conjunction system. And Maurice Chatelain himself did not know, I believe, how prevalent this base 20 system of counting was in the ancient world. You really have to study up on this to know about this. So the media today do not know how significant what is happening in this year really is. I believe this also seems to be a kind of weather cycle, and my own hypothesis is of a 1,000-year occurrence in temperatures, because 1,000 years ago, if you read chronicles about England, people were dying from the extreme temperatures, from the heat, from the tornadoes, from the earthquakes. And you'll be saying to yourself, well, I've never heard of earthquakes, tornadoes, and massive heat waves in England. And the reason you haven't heard that is because we've not yet reached the top of that cycle. The cycle may have peaked in the 1100s, the 1200s. At that time, we were in something that my old professor referred to as the 12th century Renaissance. Suddenly, in medieval Europe, there was abundance, there was learning, massive Gothic cathedrals arose, and we had massive empires. The Roman Empire did not outlast 1,000 years, it lasted about 800 years. From 400 BC to 400 AD, a separate Eastern Empire skipped that cycle, and it arose with its peak in 400 AD. So the previous Roman Empire had its peak in the time of Augustus, the time of Christ, with 400 years on each side. The Second Roman Empire, with its peak in Constantinople in 400 AD, was 400 years growing, then another, 1,000 years. It was basically 1,000 years after that 350 AD founding. So empires last about 1,000 years. Why? Well, it must be because of the temperature cycles affecting crops. As soon as the crops can't grow and people starve, the empire therefore becomes irrelevant and people decide to overthrow that empire. But of course, we cannot figure the other effects. What about the tornadoes, the earthquakes, the freak weather? Well, there are charts showing an increase in earthquake energy in the 20th century. And we don't have much in the way of charts of earthquake energy throughout human history. But the earthquake energy is on the increase. Why? We don't know.
So what can we say about a conclusion for this piece? What can we talk about? Well, firstly, we're hampered by the lack of essentially a proper nomenclature to even describe the old Hebrew peoples, the old Hebraic peoples. We just don't have that nomenclature available to us. It's a problem. Can we describe the Phoenicians as Abramic? We cannot. They diverged even before Abraham migrated out of Mesopotamia and into Egypt. So we are hamstrung already at the outset. What can we talk about with regard to three kings? Possibly there was one in Babylon. There was another one maybe in Carthage, maybe in Roman Carthage, maybe a satellite king, possibly even Spain. That would cover the Africa or the European. Maybe there was one to the north, and on the solstice, because it was traditional to follow solstice lines, although that seems to be difficult in this case, maybe migrating on the solstice would be enough. They seem to have been following a pilgrimage. There seems to have been a pilgrimage across the ancient Jewish world, and this pilgrimage brought them together somewhere close to Jerusalem, somewhere in that area, because that was seen as a kind of promised land, maybe in all their religions. It's greatly unfortunate that we don't know anything about the Phoenicians. All their libraries were obviously destroyed by the Romans, and they would have had plentiful libraries. They would have been a very educated people, despite some of their barbaric practices. These three wise men would have moved themselves off towards the Holy Land. They would have looked at where the sunset was as they approached the Holy Land on or about the solstice. They would have looked at the sunset or sunrise, depending on where they were going, and moved in the opposite direction towards the Holy Land. They would have looked at how Jupiter and Saturn were slowly coming together. This would tell them that a new king was approaching, that a new world was approaching. And since it was the end of the world for them, they didn't necessarily care about their own temporal kingdoms, more possibly their place in the afterlife, because it would have been the end for them if the astrologers' predictions were true. Therefore, they would have seen this as a final duty, a final pilgrimage, and truly these were wise kings, respectful of ancient traditions, and following in their forefathers' footsteps across the proto-Jewish world. Are we on? So I hope you've enjoyed that video, and also check out the channel on a platform called Odyssey. I upload a video to YouTube, it automatically goes on to Odyssey. I'm not sure if Odyssey is Google or not, or what it is, but they seem to have a lot of backing, that's for sure. But anyway, check it out on there as well. Also check out my homepage. I've added a few pictures to it to show many of the discoveries that we've made on the channel, and I hope you have a good day.